Hi, welcome to a session on presentation of social issues and opportunities. Our speaker for today is Hayley Orndorf, and she'll be talking to us about beyond average, designing for variability with universal design for learning.
All right, thank you so much. As we get started, I'm going to actually chat the link to the slides in case you'd like to follow along on your own device. I'll be sharing my screen the whole time too, but just in case you prefer to see that on your own screen, you are welcome to do that. So, hello everyone, it's great to be here. Thank you for checking out this session. I am Hayley Orndorf and I work for BioQUEST, a nonprofit organization focused on STEM education reform through faculty professional development. BioQuest now manages the CUBES platform, which will soon be hosting Simeode as well. At BioQuest, I support initiatives around open educational resources, as well as universal design for learning, which is why I'm here tonight. I am also wrapping up my master's in learning design and technology at Purdue as I shift towards a focus on learning and instructional design. I've taken kind of a winding journey from working on education reform projects when I was an undergrad at Pitt studying biology to American Sign Language interpreting, where ASL, deaf culture, and the deaf community really introduced me to the concept of universal design. And now I found an intersection of my interests in learning design, where I'm focused on designing inclusive, accessible learning experiences for everyone. So I'm certainly not a mathematician, expert in differential equations, or following a traditional academic path. And if that's something you'd like to chat more about, particularly if you're a student, I'd be happy to do that. So feel free to reach out to me. So let's get to it. Even though this is a short presentation, I covered me, I would like to highlight a few norms that I touch on anytime I do a presentation. If you have a question or comment, do feel free to jump in, but please state your name first, like this is Hayley or Hayley here, because not everyone can always see the screen to see your name, and it's very helpful to hear others pronounce their own name. Second, use the channels that work for you. So whether that's verbally sharing or through chat, do what's most comfortable for you, and I'll be monitoring both throughout the talk. And finally, if you're comfortable, consider adding your pronouns to your name. You can do that by editing your name in Zoom. That can just be helpful so we don't end up making assumptions about anyone. Okay, let's take a quick look at the outline before diving in. So I will cover an introduction to UDL, Universal Design for Learning, which includes some background information about CAST, the founding organization, the importance of cultivating a UDL mindset when using UDL, and connections to other design approaches, particularly backwards design. And then we'll shift to touching on some strategies for implementing UDL in your work, wrapping up with resources where you can learn more. So the UDL guidelines were developed by CAST in the 1990s using neuroscience and education research. Their approach originally focused on developing technology-driven accommodations to provide access for learners with specific disabilities. Soon, their approach shifted to align with the broader concept of universal design, which originated as an architectural concept. This idea is that designing a space that plans for variability results in an environment that is more useful to everyone. A really common example are curb cuts. So when the curb goes down nicely into the road rather than a steep step off, these are essential for some people, but they also improve travel and walking through cities for people on bikes, pushing a stroller, delivering packages, wheeling luggage. That's the idea of universal design. CAST applied these ideas of universal design to learning environments to plan for predictable variability in learners. So rather than expecting learners to adjust how they learn best to meet the design of the environment, UDL guidelines act as a tool for designing flexible, adaptable learning environments that embrace the variability between and within learners. So let's dig into the UDL guidelines a bit more. On this slide is a simplified version, so I could fit it on the slide and you could maybe see it, but it links to the full interactive version at CAST, and I'm going to open that up, and you're welcome to follow along again on your own device in the slides. This is linked. So if I go to CAST and I click on the UDL guidelines, I'm pulling that up to really take a closer look here. At first glance, there's a lot of information packed into this framework. So it can be helpful to understand the organization because there's a lot of meaning in that. So there are 31 checkpoints or strategies. Those are the bullet points. And they're organized by their relationship to cognitive networks. So those are the columns here, which focus on offering multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. So the ultimate goal of UDL, which is actually depicted at the bottom of the guidelines, is to develop learners who are experts in their own learning, or purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal-oriented. Now, that does not mean that all learners will be experts in all content areas. That's not the goal, but rather all learners know how they learn best and are equipped to ensure they can make changes in an environment so that they can learn. Now, the horizontal organization provides guidance on how to support learners in achieving that goal, ranging from the external environment access to the internalized metacognitive skills in learners. So this first row, oh, you can't see the tab. Let me make my screen a bit bigger to try and see that. The first row is labeled access. Okay, it's coming in there, and then build and internalize. So I'm going to bring it back down, but I just wanted you to see that. Access, the first row addresses traditional accessibility. Now, this is really important because if a learner cannot access the environment or the material for any reason, then they can't learn. So this includes both providing alternatives to visual and auditory information, but also ensuring that learners are not threatened, right? Because if we're threatened, we can't learn. You'll actually notice that many strategies in engagement in this column overlap with principles of inclusive teaching. So UDL is not the be-all, end-all and really connects to a lot of other frameworks. Now, what's crucial, UDL doesn't stop here at traditional accessibility, which is actually a misconception about UDL, that it's only for learners with disabilities. This first row addresses traditional accessibility, but then it goes beyond that. So for example, if we move to the middle row in build, this focuses on bridging from that physical space to the metacognitive skills. So instead of looking at the external environment, the materials, this focuses on mastering content knowledge. So checkpoints here range from fostering community in sustaining effort and persistence, or in language and symbols, we dig into ensuring that text is cognitively accessible. Right? Just because something is technically accessible does not mean it's cognitively accessible to everyone. And then to expression and communication, offering multiple ways for learners to express what they know. Now, the final row focuses on developing these skills in learners so that they're equipped to make changes to the learning environment to learn best. And what this means, imagine I walk into the driest lecture possible, kind of your worst, your least ideal learning environment. Now, despite this, if I am an expert learner, I know I can find a way to make this material relevant to me, right? To do that, I activate my background knowledge, and I make a connection between this topic and something that I care about, something that's interesting to me. And because I'm self-regulating, I know that I'm disengaged. I need to find a way to be engaged. And I remember that I can pay attention better if I take handwritten notes, right? So that's the kind of thing that UDL aims to do to equip all learners to make the most of any environment. So that is a quick look at the UDL guidelines. And there's a lot more information in each checkpoint that's very helpful to check out. So you can click any checkpoint and be taken to a complete definition along with examples and then associated literature behind that. So that's a very valuable part of the guidelines, that there's so much more behind each checkpoint. And after that, you might feel very overwhelmed by UDL, and I get that. The crucial thing to remember is UDL is not a checklist. Actually, applying all the UDL checkpoints to an activity is not ideal and is actually potentially harmful. So rather than seeking to hit as many checkpoints as possible, I find it more productive to consider how to shift your mindset about design towards UDL, right? So when you're planning, designing, can you begin to make choices that support the broadest set of learners rather than aiming for the middle? So I would argue that you really need both. So coming at it from both directions, this mindset shift paired with practical suggestions for implementation. That's really crucial to keep going with UDL rather than be overwhelmed or use it as a checklist and disengage. At the end, I have some resources linked, and one of them is an activity that helps you get started in thinking about cultivating a UDL mindset for yourself and what that looks like for you. So UDL, it's a tool that shows you where you are and options for continued improvement, continued thinking about how to make the environment more flexible rather than demanding learners to change how they learn best. Now, UDL is not a standalone tool, right? In walking through the framework, I highlighted aspects that emphasize accessibility, inclusive teaching. UDL also complements other design approaches, particularly backwards design. And I chose this because it's a really common design practice. It's pretty accessible for most of us in the classroom, right? You might have heard of it. Now, backwards design is often compared to planning a trip, right? So you identify where you're going first, the goal or the objectives. Then you plan the route. So in backwards design, you need to determine your learning objectives and then determine assessments, how learners will demonstrate they've achieved those objectives, and then selecting instructional strategies that support your learning objectives, rather than going the other way around, which is what you can start with instructional strategies and then work backwards to determine assessments. Backwards design encourages you to think about where you're headed first with this goal and then winnowing down. Now, UDL just provides a framework for selecting those strategies, right? UDL is a framework of instructional strategies and really complements backwards design. So if we go to the trip metaphor again, I would say UDL is kind of GPS thinking, right? So it encourages you to remember that some people prefer the fastest route. Some people want to avoid tolls. Some people might not be driving, right? That's where UDL complements backwards design and provides you different ideas for instructional strategies that support learners in achieving your goal while providing that flexibility. Again, this is like very high level view of backwards design in UDL. My point is that UDL works well with other approaches. It's not something entirely new or extra, but should work with your current approach to designing and implementing learning in some way. That said, another important thing to remember in thinking about applying UDL is that you're already implementing aspects of UDL. So you're already doing this because UDL checkpoints generally overlap with effective instructional strategies, right? And these are not intended to be used as a checklist. I can't state that enough. You're doing some of it. So I encourage you to first think about where you are with it. After establishing where you are, you want to apply UDL in the areas where it will be most beneficial for you and for your learners. Now, this strategy and the language comes from the book Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone by Tom Tobin and Kirsten Belling, and I really like their language they used of pinch points and plus ones. So pinch points are places where you know learners struggle, right? Where do they have misconceptions? Where do they ask questions, misassessment items? What are the places you have to reteach? That's a pinch point. So first identify that and start there, right? Can you think of one more way to engage learners, represent material, or allow learners to demonstrate their knowledge and skills? That would be a +1. So you choose one UDL strategy from the framework to address that pinch point. You implement it, you evaluate, and then you're set up to iteratively improve material over time. And it sets you up to address existing barriers you're facing in your classroom already. So rather than looking at this framework and seeing how you can hit on everything, start where it improves the experience, not only for your learners, but also for you. ideally, it improves your experience as an instructor and sets you up to do less reteaching and save you time over this course of getting familiar with UDL. Now, I would like to use the remaining time for some discussion, or if people have questions, I would welcome that. Are there any broad questions about universal design for learning?
So first of all, thank you for sharing this, Hayley. How many universities are using UDL right now? Do you have any count on that? This is a great idea. I'm curious to see it.
I have no idea how many universities are really using it. It's very common in the instructional design world. So if you were to go to your Center for Teaching or Learning or talk to an instructional designer on campus, I'd almost guarantee that they're familiar with universal design for learning. So I would say if things are being developed in the Center for Teaching and Learning, they likely are addressing UDL principles. Intentionally, how many instructors are using it or how many institutions have adopted it as an approach, I can't say. It's very common in K-12. Again, it's very, very common for K-12 teachers to know and design their curriculum using UDL.
That's amazing, because when you're presenting, I was thinking I need to talk to our CTL people and see how to get this in our courses.
Yes. I would definitely encourage everyone to talk to their Center for Teaching and Learning more frequently, and I'm sure they would have great ideas and really welcome that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Then I would ask one more question. I was curious, I know this is for all models like online, hybrid, it's going to work, but is there any research on which modality works better, online or because it's really going to be different in online setting than the in-person setting. So how does UDL actually differentiates it?
Yes, that's a great question. UDL is designed to be effective in any setting and across different learners as well, from children to adults. That's a tricky question, right? A lot of times there's a misconception that because something is digital, it's accessible. So if something is done accurately, done correctly, and put online, it is generally hitting on more principles of universal design for learning, right? Because if done correctly, things are customizable. There's alternative text for images. A learner could change the font size, change the font type. It really hits on that first row of accessibility a bit better. You typically, if you're providing videos, they should be captioned. So if you're really adhering to accessibility standards, then UDL aligned online learning works really well. Particularly providing online or digital access to learners, even if you're in an in-person setting, right? Having the slides on your own device is really impactful, that type of thing. Now, other challenges, right? Fostering collaboration and community, really facilitating effective group work can be challenging in an online setting, depending on if you're fully asynchronous or if you're synchronous. So I would say each one presents different challenges. But if you are putting material online and adhering to accessibility standards, then UDL complements that really well, or you'd hit on more elements of UDL by default. Great question.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have a question. So I was looking at the website, and there's in the part where frequently asked questions and answers, they say there's a question that's funny, that is why are there multiple versions?
Yes.
So can you elaborate what the multiple versions are?
Definitely. So as I said, the first iteration of the UDL guidelines was developed late 90s. believe. And CAST really is committed to improving these over time. So as we have new research on learning and new information, they just create new versions of the guidelines. The most recent one was really a shift in conceptual organization to make it easier to use. So they just have iterated on what the UDL guidelines are, and there's actually a new version in the works to better address social justice concerns and equity more explicitly in the guidelines. So that's actually UDL Rising to Equity. What I'm looking at just here, there will be a new version of the guidelines coming soon too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
They're great. I hadn't seen them.
that's good news. Then you can check them out.
Okay, any other questions? This wonderful talk, and let's thank Hayley for this wonderful talk. And she is going to be here continuing the second part of the talk. We can continue the discussion, or we will start this next talk at 5:30.